Thank you for joining us this afternoon, everyone. This is Paul Rocchio at the International Franchise Association. We have another awesome IFA Coronavirus Updates webinar for you. We have three great panelists, and the topic today is understanding loan, grant, and funding options in the stimulus package. Speakers today are David Barr, Tam Kennedy, and Ron Feldman. We are recording today's webinar, and we will make it available later this evening on the coronavirus section on franchise.org. And on that note, I will go ahead and turn things over to David. David, please take it away, my friend.
Thank you all for being on the call. We know we have franchisors and franchisees alike, and potentially even some suppliers. We appreciate you being on. We believe there's over 2,000 registered. Under our go-to meeting, we kind of cap out at 1,000 attendees. So thank you again for being on. We'll make this available to friends, family, and anybody interested later on through a recording. So please pass it on if you find it helpful. We're glad at IFA that you are looking to us as a resource. We want to be the preeminent voice in franchising, and that's important to us. Today, as mentioned, we have Ron Feldman, who runs development at ApplePie, and is, I think, the premier expert in franchising on this. And ApplePie has really taken a leadership role, and I think you'll see that. And we certainly ask that you consider them as you think of next steps for your business. We have Tam Kennedy, a franchisee who has been intimate in the process of understanding what funding is available out there, and I think brings a great franchisee perspective for those that are on the phone. As you all know, we've had an interesting time, and IFA has been very involved in the process of coming up with the CARES Act and a lot of the sausage making behind the scenes. Spencer, if I can ask you to advance a slide. And so what we wanted to do today was talk about the Paycheck Protection Program, oftentimes now called PPPL, and that is part of the CARES Act, which was the Coronavirus Act that was just passed over the weekend. Spencer, if you can advance the slide. Two more, please. So part of this act is, another one, please. And so what we wanted to do was tell you about funding that's available. And what's interesting, and I'm just going to touch on the PPPL first, and then we'll circle back around the disaster recovery loan, which is what you're seeing up here at the moment. The PPPL loan is really the first loan that SBA has ever done that you don't have to show a need for. You don't have to show that you cannot get credit elsewhere, and you don't have to show collateral, and you don't have to show a personal guarantee. So it's unique, and we think it's perfect for this time of advancing quickly relative to getting liquidity, which is really what I'd like you to hear is the theme today, which is we, the three of us on this phone, and I think most people are giving guidance, is liquidity is key at this moment. And you have to get liquidity because, candidly, we don't know how long this virus is going to be impacting your business. Every business has been impacted differently. At Franworth, we have health and beauty businesses such as Lash Lounge that at the moment are largely closed. However, I'm also involved in restaurant business that might be, shall we say, 80% or 50% open. Doesn't matter what your business, liquidity is key. And so what we're going to offer up to you today is how can you maximize liquidity? Most of the questions seem to come in around loan forgiveness. I'm going to ask you to take those blinders off for a moment, get liquidity. Then after the fact, we can also be discussing what is loan forgiveness. But liquidity is key, and we're going to go over all of it today. So first, let me kick off with the first phase, or a phase that was certainly before the CARES Act, was the Disaster Recovery Loan Act. And what that did was it allowed for those businesses that were impacted by the virus and had damages to apply for the Disaster Recovery Loan Act. Typically that comes about because of a state of emergency You might think of hurricanes, tornadoes, and the like. So what they did was stand up a program that rides clearly on the rails of that through the SBA. Many have applied for that. I know from speaking to head administrators at the SBA that they have a huge backlog of these loans. The reason I'm going to skip over it fairly quickly is that under the PPPL loan, which I think applies to more franchising than the disaster recovery, any disaster recovery loan that you receive is going to be rolled into that loan and will be packaged up as part of it. Not necessarily forgiven, but you'll be moving from a 30-year loan to a 10-year loan. So just briefly, where do I think a disaster recovery loan might be more appropriate? If someone was in a business that's employee light and asset heavy, oftentimes, so in franchising today, we might think of the salon businesses that are rented out to stylists. That is an asset heavy business, employee light. The reason for that is that PPPL loans are based upon your payroll. So in those cases, you wouldn't have much payroll. Disaster recovery is based upon your need as a result of the disaster. The maximum loan under the disaster recovery is $2 million. It'll be a 30-year loan at 3.75%. I believe the slide says not to exceed 4%. Ron would know better, but nonetheless, interest light loan, shall we say, oftentimes does require a personal guarantee. I've heard rumors that maybe it won't be if waived during a future period. And then loan forgiveness is none. Some of you might have seen some webinars I've done before where I said, get as much of this as you can and then see what happens with the PPPL. That was during the discussions of the PPPL. Now that that CARES Act has been completed and given the enormous backlog of the disaster recovery, I would say for most franchise businesses that have large payroll, I would suggest focus on getting the CARES Act or the PPPL loan as quickly as possible. Don't let the disaster recovery slow you up. If you've already applied for disaster recovery and you're in the queue and they come and want to give you money, my recommendation again is around liquidity. I'd take the money. And it's not going to preclude you from getting the next loan under the CARES Act or PPPL. So I would do that. I just don't believe, I think the queue is so long at disaster recovery to start that program now, unless that's the best loan for you. I'm not sure you're going to get ahead of the CARES Act anyways. So with that, let's, Ron, do you have anything to add to that on disaster recovery?
No, I think the other thing, and you kind of touched on it, but only the SBA can originate a disaster recovery loan. And if you think about how impaired your business is, think about the SBA offices. They can't go to work. They're probably not in the cloud. This is the government we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So the odds of your application actually getting even looked at are not very high. So that is going to create a bottleneck, and people get hung up on the 2 million as well. You've got to prove an injury up to 2 million.
Yep.
You can't just say I want $2 million. So if your injury is only $100,000 or $200,000, that's all you're going to get out of this loan as well.
A good point. And so a point of difference, as Spencer advances to the next slide, is under the PPPL, what the government's done is empower, under the 7A program that was already there, is empowered that the financial institutions can originate these loans and then lay them off onto the government. So as a result, if you think of it, you have the whole financial infrastructure of the US kind of working on these next set of loans, and you have just administrative individuals at SBA working as hard as they can, but nonetheless are restricted in their capacity to get much done. Which then brings us to the CARES PPPL loans. I oftentimes refer to it as CARES just because I can say it more quickly. but think of them as somewhat interchangeable. The PPPL stands for the Paycheck Protection. And the goal here was by the government that small businesses would maintain employment of their employees, and that the government would incent you to do so. They would do so by first providing you liquidity through the loan, and then secondly, providing for forgiveness under the loan. Again, I'm going to ask you in the spirit to really think of liquidity. And if once you have liquidity, you can lean in from a patriotic standpoint and want to do employment, that's great. But I think you'll find that much of this loan, if you have a closed shop today, which many do in the franchise business, very difficult to lean in, hire your people as the loan might have guessed you would, and think that you're going to have liquidity into the summertime. It's just not going to happen. If you have revenue, then that's a possibility, and it all depends upon how much revenue you have now versus pre-virus. So just touching on what do we have here with respect to the CARES Act. Again, no need needs to be shown. As Ron just mentioned, you have to show damages under disaster recovery. Under the CARES Act, you do not. You don't have to have collateral. You don't have to have personal guarantee. There's really no reason, I don't think, that a person shouldn't be taking this loan unless you had certain debt covenants around your existing indebtedness. And I will tell you, even then, I would be speaking with your lender about how this is, in essence, junior capital to any senior secured, and that they should be allowing or rewriting your covenants in order to obtain this. So what the loan does is, in essence, it uses your payroll base as the way in which to calculate the amount of the loan. And in general terms, it's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll prior to February 15th. Now, there are some different definitions around seasonality for those businesses that are greatly seasonal, and there's different definitions for those who started up in the last 12 months. There are plenty of resources where you can find that information, but just roughly think about it as 2.5 times your payroll prior to February 15th. And therefore, what payroll is defined as is any salary, wages as shown on the screen, any compensation, payments of cash tips, payments for vacation, allowance for dismissals and separations, as well as group health care and retirement benefits. What it does not include, and what people have often asked me, it does not include Social Security taxes, federal taxes. It does include state or local taxes assessed on the compensation of the employee, but it does not include payroll taxes, Medicare, and those type of taxes. So again, gross wages times 2.5%. Spencer, if you can advance the slide. So that is the loan. And then once you have that loan amount, you assess, and I'm just glancing here. So you have this loan, and initially you have waiver of its interest and principal payment, and there will be a process of applying for sick leave, and I'm going to have Ron go through that. So what you can use this loan for is extended beyond payroll. So you can use this loan for rent, interest payments on mortgage obligations, and utilities, as well as payroll. They only do that.
Let me just jump in real quick.
Please, Rob.
The first bullet here, the first $100,000 will count if you have highly compensated people like regional managers, district managers. That will count. Anything over that will not. That's a very common question that we've gotten. And I actually got this question from someone in Texas where they have people crossing the border every day. I guess they're not crossing the border anymore to come to work. If you have people living outside of the US, those wages are completely excluded.
Correct.
So just for those people that are out there.
But Ron, just to be clear, and this is for the attendees on the phone, this is how fluid this is. I guess as I read the law, and I've just even read some summaries this morning, I think it's still questionable as to whether the first 100,000 is included or not. Have you seen, outside of the writing of the law, have you seen anything in guidance around that yet?
We did see some guidance from NAGL, which is the National Association of Government
Okay.
Guaranteed Lenders, to that effect. But again, we should have probably said this in the beginning. We jumped over the disclaimer part, but none of this, there's been no rulemaking at all yet. So they passed the law, and now there's going to be rulemaking. They say they're going to do it within 15 days. We'll see if that happens. That's to be decided. But once the rulemaking is done, what we're trying to do today is to let everyone in the audience know what is going to be out there so they can get prepared and so that they can make their business strategy decisions. So that is really important. Go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, thank you for that. And I only mention that because I think 3 people can read this one sentence in the law, and you could read it different ways. I know the summaries I've produced, I got to the point where I just wrote exactly what the law read, because it can be difficult. I think almost all of us that deal in this area believe they will allow salaries up to 100,000 to be included in compensation. But I don't want to by any means say that's an absolute within how it's written. And we believe that because it does allow for sole proprietors, for those franchisees on the phone, it's very clear that sole proprietors who make more than $100,000, that their first $100,000 will be included in this loan. It's just they use different words as it relates to the broader compensation. So as Ron said, and I was trying to skip through this kind of quickly, you can see on here what's excluded. I'm not going to go through those. I think one other piece I should have mentioned is this loan is only available for small businesses. Small businesses is defined as those businesses with less than 500 employees. That's the typical 7A program. However, there's an exception. That exception is for SIC code 72, which is hotels and restaurants that do not have more than 500 people in any one location. I'm not aware of a restaurant that has more than 500 people in one location. Certainly there might be larger hotel and resorts that are. So what happens is you get a loan, and that loan in essence does not become effective from a sense of payment of principal and interest until there's a decision-making around forgiveness. And the forgiveness is based upon your FTE employment, and Ron's going to be going through that. But after that point, then this, whatever is left over becomes a 10-year note at 4%, no personal guarantee. So I will state again before I hand this over to Ron, that I think it's important that people almost bifurcate that decision. I would go get as much of the loan as you can get, and then come back, and if you either want to prepay it, which there's no penalty, or you want to have that loan on your balance sheet for 10 years and therefore have the cash, that's what I would be doing. But I would not, I think there's been too much analysis, in my opinion, by small businesses who are fretting and trying to decide and calculate their exact forgiveness. And I think it's a waste of energy at this point, my own opinion. So with that, Spencer, if you can advance the slide, we're going to flip it to Ron, and I apologize to attendees for this delay. Ron, I'm just going to let you take it from here, and there's going to be a slide in there that might have been the other transition, but Ron, why don't I flip it to you and let you take it?
Sure. So as it relates to the loan sizing is based on payroll only. However, you're borrowing 10 weeks. Think about it this way. You're borrowing 10 weeks of payroll, and the forgiveness period is only 8 weeks. So you have another 4 weeks of payroll dollars in your loan available to get forgiveness. And these other 3 categories are the 3 acceptable categories for you to get that forgiveness. So I'm going to show you an example in a minute. Always try and make a picture a little better. But if you use that as your theme, that's great. If you don't retain 100% of your employees, you're still eligible for forgiveness, but that forgiveness will be reduced, and that'll be shown in the chart I think it's on the next slide, I'm not sure. And I want to echo David's comments. If you're out there and you're a franchisee and you don't have a year's worth of cash, get the money. Even if you have a year's worth of cash, get the money. You can always prepay it without ever making a payment and have no penalty. There's no credit check, personal credit check. There's only a few ways you can't get this money. They haven't even outlined those yet, but if you've defaulted on previous federally funded debt, I think you're going to be excluded. But for the 99.9% people out there watching this, this will work. What I did here in this slide, again, rules aren't set yet, so this is just an illustration. If you had an average monthly payroll of $20,000, you multiply that by 2.5, you got $50,000, and you only maintain 70% of your payroll. On the left example, you would have paid out $28,000 over 8 weeks. 70% of that is $19,600, and so on and so forth. So you would, in essence, be getting 58% of your loan forgiven because you had your retention ratchet down your forgiveness percentage. If you look at the example on the right, it's showing 100% where you've kept all of your payroll on board, had all of your expenses. You've now spent 107% of what your loan is, but you can only be forgiven 100% of it. So again, I just use some round numbers that are pretty common to many franchise businesses. Very simple tool. We're publishing it in the next couple of days. Once the rules are made, we're not publishing our guests. When the rules are made, we'll have that published and IFA will have it available. So that is an easy way for you to understand as a franchisee how much of the loan is going to be forgiven. The forgiveness will happen before you make a payment, as long as you are diligent in sending in your paperwork. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what that paperwork is yet because we don't know, but we have a suspicion. We've been, all of us have been doing SBA lending for a long time, and we kind of know what they usually ask for. Next slide, please.
Keep going.
So this is a question we've been getting at ApplePie for a long time. What should I be getting? Go back one. There you go. What should I have handy? This is what you would need to get an SBA loan. You're going to need less than this. This is overkill. But if you're going to get yourself ready to get in line, and let me take a minute to reinforce this point. This is, and it's hard for me to say this, there's only $350 billion in this fund. If you think about it, every big restaurant and hotel chain is going to be going after this money. It's not going to last. If you want to get this loan, speed is your friend and haste is your enemy. So what I would be doing if I were in your shoes, and I've been a franchisee 3 times in my life, I would get all this together and stick it in a folder on my computer or in the cloud and have it in digital form. You don't want to have paper. The hardest thing probably for most of you out there to have in digital form is your payroll register, because they don't come very organized. Reach out to your payroll providers, see if they'll help you. But your payroll register is what's going to drive the front end of this. The front end of this is strictly payroll times 2.5. So your payroll provider is the person that you need to lean on if you don't have access to the records yourself or have an accounting professional that'll be very quick to help you. Have this stuff available. When the guidance comes out, you'll have it to send in, because I think a matter of days or weeks will matter until this money runs out. That said, I'm letting everyone know that I've already let IFA know that we need more money, and we're going to be going out and trying to get it. But who knows if the checkbook's still going to be open from the federal government.
Yeah.
Any comments from David or Tam there?
No, I think that's right. I've seen other lists that have utilities and rents and copies of leases. I will echo what Ron said. I'd be highly surprised if the SBA or lenders want to get into that during what I'm calling this first step. The first step's just getting the loan out. The second step will be around forgiveness, and there you might need more documentation of lease, utilities, and other things, only because that goes into the total calculation of maximum forgiveness. But again, I think you make a great point, Ron. Payroll, because a lot of people don't have easy digitized access to that.
Next slide, please. So this is just from the language of the bill, the way I explained the picture I just showed you. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but, and by the way, the bill changed at the 11th hour, and it now says that the measurement period starts on the day you get your loan, which I don't know how that works, because you don't know the day you're going to get your loan to go back 12 months. You know the day you've applied. So all of this is very fluid. Please don't take these dates to be gospel. We're waiting on the rulemaking, but having the records available is very important. Again, this was taken from a pretty reliable source, and it says eligible payroll costs do not include compensation above 100,000 in wages. So I'm hoping that the government, that was the intent, to go back to the prior.
And Ron, to your point, that's exactly what the bill says. There's just some that can interpret that as all payroll for that individual greater than 100 is excluded, and others would say above 100. And so, again, I think to Ron's point, all fluid. We just asking you to get prepared. I do think it's important to point out that there's also a covered period definition that people need to be careful about, and it's similar here. There's a covered period for the loan, which is in essence comes back to the 2.5 times the prior year period, or 2.5 payroll for average 12 months. And then, which ends up being effectively 10 weeks, right? Roughly. And what the 8-week is the period of time that you have coverage for purposes of implying the loan for forgiveness. And so people have gotten hung up on that you have an 8-week on the back end, 10-week in essence defining on the front end, but that's why other items can be included in the maximum forgiveness. So they are trying to provide additional liquidity. But again, it's liquidity. Go ahead, Ron.
Thanks. Next slide, please. So again, this is just reinforcement of what happens if you can't keep your employees. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on as it relates to unemployment comp and the federal supplement to unemployment comp, where you might try to hire people back, but it might make more sense for them to not work. We're not going to get into that dialogue today. I think we're probably all singing from the same sheet of music that was not a really good idea that was slipped in at the 11th hour. But it does, what I will say here is that it doesn't matter who the employees are. It matters about having the employees. It's FTEs as defined by Obamacare. So take your salaried employees, that's 1 FTE, then take all of your hourly employees and divide by 30, that's the balance of your FTEs. As long as you have that number, then that will count towards the forgiveness number. Again, qualifying that with, that's in the letter of the bill, not in the rulemaking. But for the franchisees out there that have a lot of perhaps high school kids working for them, it's good to make sure you overhire and have more people and have the hours if forgiveness is important to you. I would not take this loan because I wanted it to be forgiven. I would take this loan and whatever and I'd make the business decision that was right for me, and then whatever's forgiven is gravy if I were in your shoes. There's one other piece that we don't have in the slides that I want to make sure everyone's aware of. There is a section in the bill that says that every existing SBA loan that's been made since the beginning of time that is still in existence and in servicing will have the Treasury pay the next 6 months of principal and interest to the bank. I didn't believe it when I read it. A part of me still doesn't believe it, but the National Association of Government Guaranteed Lenders put out guidance today saying that it's true. So franchisors and franchisees, you need to start letting your franchisees and your franchisee friends know that if they have SBA loans, and if the loans are in forbearance today, which many of them are, that this will start after the forbearance period. So you might end up with 9 months of no debt payments if you have an SBA loan.
Correct.
Again, it only applies to SBA loans. So I wanted to make sure we got that point across today to everyone out there. Next slide, please. So what comes next? And I think we should open it up to the panel here. There's going to be a lot of failed businesses here. There was an announcement today that there is a belief that 11% of all restaurants will close permanently as a result of this problem. I think that number's low, my opinion. I think you've heard it a few times. Having cash in your account is your best defense. Having cash in your account gives you choices. Having no cash in your account gives you less choices. There's no risk to getting this loan, little to no risk. And this is an important point, and then I'll turn it over to David and Tam. When this all ends, there's going to be a new normal in life, but there's also going to be a new normal in the credit markets. And nobody knows how the credit folks, when you start trying to build more units and grow your businesses, what that's going to look like. And having more liquidity today couldn't be more important than ever. So my belief is we're going to go back to the SBA rules of 2008-10, the Great Recession, where they increased their government guarantees on SBA loans, and there's a mad rush to safety by the lending institutions.
Yeah.
That's my belief. I think that's common sense. Any other comments, David, Tam?
The only comment I'd make, and I'll throw it over to Tam, is again about liquidity. I have had so many discussions with franchisees who are trying to parse out, well, what if I hire that person or don't hire that person? And I echo what Ron said. You maximize liquidity. You run the business as if you never got that liquidity. Run your business like you never got the loan, in my opinion. And if that would have been 100% employment because your business is doing well, then you're going to be forgiven. That's great. If that is, I only have enough business to give 50% of the hours, then you give 50% of the hours. And just roughly, I'm using some wide generalizations here, but 50% of the loan gets forgiven and 50% sits on your balance sheet for 10 years. That's not a bad thing because in theory, you got 50% of the cash. So I personally believe, I have some businesses in China, I've lived this, I've seen this. I think this is going to be deep and wide. So I encourage people to really pause and not get exuberant, not worry about whether we're going to be done with this at Easter, April 30th, May, because even if the government takes off a date, you have to look at your own business model and say, does the customer come rushing back? Does the customer come rushing back into salons? Does the customer come rushing back into your restaurant? And if the answer is no, it once again says get liquidity. Tam, any comments?
Thank you. Just a couple. One, just as there will be a rush for money, there's going to be a rush for employees, because those that take this loan may find that their original employees that they've had to furlough are being scooped up by others just because they're trying to make a pre-planned position of meeting the forgiveness numbers. I would be thinking carefully about the fine point that Ron shared, that doesn't have to be the same employee. It has to be the same number of employees. There's also a very small, not well talked about portion of this is that you have to bring them back at no less than 25% in reduced wages from your original payroll registers. So I've heard some folks trying to think about how to scale, have the right number of employees, but also try to skin a little off the top on pay. Probably not your best idea when everybody's going to be fighting for the same employee. So keep that in mind. Always hire. I think that's really what we've got to talk about. Always find a way to make sure that you're working with the employees that you have, and make sure that you're out there understanding that just like there's a rush for capital, there's going to be a rush for employees as well. The second thing that I would point out is that from a practical perspective as a franchisee, apply in two places. I'm hearing 100,000 people have applied in one county's US bank branches, or done, maybe not applied, but done the pre-application stuff. If I'm number 99,000 on that list, but I'm number 1,000 with a second lender, of course I'm going to go with the first one that gets me to yes. And so the terms are the same. If you're used to dealing with the larger financial lending institutions, you might find that you're way, way back on the list. And this is a good time to think about, through the work that you do, other lenders that you may know. Ron, as an example for me, that might help me connect dots faster, and may be specifically focused on making this work for all of us and delivering what we need. So give that some thought. And the last thing I would tell you, purely from a practical application, when you get this money, consider putting it in a brand new checking account and paying your obligations towards this loan through that checking account to simplify on the back end the proof that you need to show that you use the funds in a way that makes it forgiven, if that is your interest to have it forgiven. There's going to be a lot of stuff to do in the next 8 weeks, 16 weeks, and beyond. I'm looking for the fastest way to get through those hoops so that I can keep going. So everything that Ron and David shared, I guess those would be the three that jump out to me quick.
Great. Ron, any further comment? Or we move forward?
No, I just want to cover the last bullet, and then I think we can go into Q&A. This is an election year. Everyone in Congress is up for re-election. There's a presidential election, and a third of the senators are being elected. I want to just talk about IFA advocacy and take the bully pulpit for a second and say, if you're not in Franchise Action Network, get in it. Small business got 6.8% of this package, and 350 over 2 trillion. And in fact, that's not just small business because of the exclusion of hotels and restaurants. It's actually less, but small business employs 60% of the workforce. We need to go back and get more, but we need your voices, and we need you to get involved. So I'll make that one appeal to everyone on this call to please get on Franchise Action Network and sign up.
So before we went to Q&A, Tam had some slides. Tam, can we slam through them real quick, and then we'll.
Oh, my bad. I'm sorry.
No worries,
okay.
Spencer. Please advance, Spencer. So just really quick, one more. I've been doing a lot of digging on what's out there besides this one great big giant pool of money. And so offering some resources to you. Remember, this slide deck is available or we posted on the IFA's coronavirus, franchise.org/coronavirus for you to go back and grab these links. But Forbes has done a pretty good job on an article that kind of outlines some of the state funds and some of the microloans that are out there. Some are zero interest, some are very low interest, state by state. Take a look at that. Spencer, we'll kind of whip through these quick. The next slide should be about Fundbox. Fundbox is a site that lists everything state by state. So depending on where you operate, go check it out. They've also got some resources on down the road that you might consider, but right now they've got a full list state by state of kind of what's out there. Clickable links that can get you there faster. Let's take a look at that. And next slide, please. Okay, one of my favorites when we talk about additional monies, grants. I think that most people overlook the grant opportunity. Understand that there was just a tremendous amount of money as part of this package that went to state level grants. And the states have to move that money through the grant system. A lot of states have already announced how they're using those grants. Keep in mind that some of them are very specifically carved out for economically depressed areas, minority structured businesses, women-owned businesses. I know, I'm pretty sure it's 25 million right off the top went to women-owned businesses. So that's something that I'm looking at as well. But Grant Watch takes a look at grants from everywhere, some big, some small, something to always look at, not just for this, but going forward as you take a look at your business and your franchisees that are thinking about starting up and building out through maybe, like I said, economically distressed neighborhoods and some of the quiet main streets. There's a lot of main street money out there for little towns. Next slide, Spencer. Let's see. We should have one more. So this was important to me. Something that a lot of us don't really realize is that when this money was allocated state by state for some of the unemployment funds and that the governors have to post any legislative activity that happens for their state, and oftentimes it's a singular resource to go check out what's going on in your state. Go to this website, click on your state. It'll take you to the governor's site for the state. You might have to do some digging around through there, but if they've made a proclamation about where they're moving the money to, or anything that has to do with what we're all experiencing right now, you'll see it. But you'll also see things that are very state specific, like deferrals for real estate taxes, extensions of deadlines for filing, everything from getting a new driver's license I've seen to voter registry. It's all out there state by state. And so it's a good place to dig around and see if you can find something for your state. And then I should have a couple more. Go ahead, Spencer. All right, so business sector grants, you've probably all heard about the Facebook money. I think there probably was a run on that very, very fast, but other business sector grants that you might not know about are listed here. This is on CWE Online. There's just a ton out there to look at, even down to the city. I think I saw today Beaverton, Oregon has money. Richmond, Virginia, it just city by city, wherever your business is, or if you have friends that you know, cruise through there, and in fact, all of these links, and see what there is to see. Some are for nonprofit, for sure. Maybe you've got friends and family that work in the nonprofit side. That can always help the communities that we service. Some big names there. And of course, Amazon, there's quite a few others that have been announced, but money's coming in fast into kind of this business sector grant world. And I have to say that the application process for most of this is going to run along the same lines of what you're already collecting. They'll want to know when you started business, how many people you employ, those kinds of things. So you're doing some of the work that you're going to need to fill out these forms. I will tell you, just for all of my homies in Iowa, we have a deadline of March 31st. There is a statewide grant out there for between $5,000 and $25,000 that expires tomorrow night at midnight. You have to get your application in. Almost the exact same list that Ron and Dave shared have to be turned into the state. There's no other qualifications. There's no collateral. It's a grant. It's a bridge grant for the businesses, and a lot of states are doing that. So keep that in mind. Yes, we've got to jump on this money from the federal government, but remember, some of it was moved to the states. And if you're not looking at your states and your communities, now is a good time to do that as well. I think that's all I have, guys.
Great. Paul, why don't we turn it back to you for some Q&A, and we'll run through as much as we can before time permits.
Yeah, wonderful, folks. And yeah, I lost count of the questions about 45 minutes ago. So obviously, if we can't get to all of these questions, we will download them and I'll share them with you guys. Maybe there's another way we could address them all. But the first question I wanted to focus on has to do with unemployment. This person has put all their majority of their employees, they've laid them off. They're obviously receiving $600 per week, which is actually more than they would be making. Are there limitations on the unemployment period? They're just worried they're not going to be able to get these employees back on board.
Well, I'll jump on that. I mean, I was not very happily surprised when that was slid into the bill. And it's a disincentive, quite frankly, for people to come back to work. I would encourage whoever that person is to remind them that when this is all over and unemployment is over, that position will be filled by somebody. And if they choose for it to be them, that they should come back to work. I don't think there's a financial incentive you could give somebody who would be making more than double what they'd be making, or 40% more than they'd be making working versus not working.
I would agree with that. I don't have anything more to add. Go ahead,
Thank
Paul.
you, guys. We've received a number of questions like this. So where do you apply for a PPPL loan? You guys may have covered that, but I apologize if you did.
No, Ron's probably the best expert on that.
So you can't apply yet because there is no application yet. So what myself and a bunch of other IFA members have done is set up a pre-application website. If you wanted to use us, you can go to applepiecapital.com and click on the coronavirus banner. It'll take you to a landing page where you can register. We are over collecting data so that we have it on file. And when this application is finally released, not finally, the thing just signed on Friday, but when it is released, it seems like it's been a month since then. We will then map your data into that application and get it out to you for e-signature with a link for you to upload the payroll registers or whatever that set of documents are. And we're pushing that through digitally to SBA lenders so that there can be more speed. I know a couple of my competitors, I know BoFly is doing the same thing. I think FranFund is also doing the same thing. I would go that way. And the only caveat I'll give you, and I know, Tim, you said you should apply more than one place. If you apply at more than one place, your EIN could get kicked out as trying to get two loans. So be careful. If you're going to do that, you got to stay on top of your second application if you get an approval on the first one and withdraw it, because you don't want to get put to the back of the line for trying to double dip. So
Agreed.
just be very careful about that.
Yeah, I agree.
The only other comment I'd make is the bill does expand the number of financial institutions who might be able to assist in this. However, there are not great incentives for the lenders to jump on board with this program. Financially, it's not as if they're making a ton of money in this processing. I would say, and Ron, see if you agree or disagree with this, to the degree that some of you as franchisees began your business with an SBA loan and you were well pleased with whoever handled it and you have an ongoing relationship with them, that might be a quick way. If you don't and you're starting from scratch, I would contend you need to be working with someone who's digitizing this. If someone thinks and says to you, just bring over a folder of paper and we'll sit down and we'll start looking at it, we'll process, you're setting yourself up for an awful long, arduous process.
Great.
So, and with that, Ron can't say this, but certainly ApplePie is one of the best in the industry, and some of the other names he mentioned are as well. They all are part of the IFA ecosystem, and we appreciate their partnership.
Thank you, folks. Next question, could you also expand on the difference between the SBA disaster loan and the paycheck loan? Which one is more beneficial? What kind of expenses can we claim in the SBA disaster plan?
Yeah, I think we went over that pretty well, Paul.
Okay.
I don't know what time that question came in. If someone joined later, it's at the first part of this presentation. Let us just say, in large part, the PPPL loans are for employee heavy, asset light. If you're asset heavy, employee light, meaning you don't have much payroll, and yet you had a lot of damages, disaster recovery is worth looking at. Other than that, we might just refer you back to the beginning of this presentation.
Excellent, thank you. If I anticipated the need for cash to make payroll and other costs, so I applied for a line of credit that has not yet gone through, can I convert it to a stimulus package loan?
You can do both, but I'll let Ron add to that.
I would do both. If your bank is considering giving you a line of credit, now the only question you want to find out is what's the collateral associated with the line of credit. If they want your house, it's a different decision than if they're just going to give you a line of credit on the business. The PPPL loans have no personal guarantees and no collateral. So you have really no personal risk outside of fraud. If you commit fraud, they will come after you. If you use this money to buy a BMW instead of paying your employees, they will come after you. But I would, again, get as much cash as you can. That's the way I would look at it.
Wonderful. Is it true that there will be SBA loan payments made for 6 months directly to our lenders by the government? You may have covered that. I apologize.
Yeah, I did cover that. Yes, the answer is yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me go back to the last question just briefly. The only hiccup that people might run into, and this is why I'm encouraging you to have the discussions now, is if somebody has covenants that all debt might be included in a leverage ratio. This could trigger a debt covenant issue. You just need to have those discussions with your lender. I think educated lenders will well know that this is capital that's coming in below them on the capital structure and would be supportive of it because it increases liquidity. But what you don't want to do is not, if you have those type of covenants, not be having that discussion with your lender. Take this debt. And I only say this because we don't know where the world's going to be 4 months from now. Lenders might be trying to get their own set of liquidity. And if they see an opportunity to trigger a debt covenant on you and in essence, take that liquidity from you to cure a covenant default, you just don't want to be in that scenario. So if you have existing debt with existing financial covenants, be sure you review them and be sure you talk to that lender. And they should be educated enough to waive any default with respect to this loan coming on your books.
Excellent. This just came in. Several websites on the PPPL program have indicated that the loan amount is based on a 2.5 times payroll plus rent plus utilities plus interest. Your presentation stated that the loan is based on just payroll, but the proceeds can be used for rent plus utilities plus interest. Can you clarify, please?
Yeah, I can.
Go ahead, Ron.
That is, whatever website that person looked at is incorrect. The maximum loan size is based on payroll dollars only, but the forgiveness portion of those loans can include rent, interest, and utilities and payroll, period.
Period. And there's no doubt about that. I will only tell people there's two terms in the loan or in the document. It talks about the maximum loan amount and also talks about the maximum forgiveness amount. In the maximum loan amount, It is 2.5 times the payroll, as we talked about, average monthly payroll, and there's some definitions around that, plus any roll-in of existing SBA disaster recovery loan or $10 million, whichever is lesser of that calculation. That is absolutely clear. So payroll is all that you're looking at. Under maximum forgiveness, it does start rolling in some of these other costs that you might incur during an 8-week period subsequent to loan origination. And I think sometimes when people are quickly reading websites, they're confusing those two. But it's absolutely, as Ron stated, it's 2.5 times.
Thank you. If I get a PPPL loan and subsequently go out of business, what happens to the loan?
Well, it's a non-collateralized, non-personal guaranteed loan. So whoever the owner of that loan is, and it probably will be the Treasury Department, will own that loan. We'll try and get out of the assets of your business whatever those proceeds are, but they don't have a UCC filing. So it's basically unsecured credit. As long as you didn't commit fraud in using the money and you used it only for those categories, I don't think you'll have any personal liability. But if you use the money for, and I love the idea that Tam had of using a separate bank account, that's brilliant, because then there's an audit trail in one account of where all the money went. And I'm going to start using that. I'm going to steal that from you, Tam. But it's an unsecured loan. That's all it is, without them even having your personal signature. So it's lower on the feeding table than a credit card is.
Again, if that might be the case that you think that could happen to you, still go get the money now, because it might change your mind and it might change the trajectory of your business. Get your paperwork ready and get going on this today, yesterday. You've got to be ready to have this money make a difference to you, and you don't know what this looks like. David and Ron, it's fair to say there's going to be a fourth dip at this here really soon. And the three of us are working with a bunch of others to craft what that could look like. And along with some of the language we need for structure on this one, we're already moving out ahead at IFA on helping the government understand that this is deep and wide, like David said. Don't give up. I'm telling you, don't give up. And but just get ready. Get your stuff ready and get on this money now.
I think we have time for one more question. Can you apply to both PPP and SBA disaster loan just to get a 10K grant?
Yeah.
You can. If you get the 10K grant, it will be deducted from your PPPL loan.
Correct.
Wonderful.
So I would suggest the disaster recovery, again, if you have a significant disaster damages that you can show and your employee light, you can get that, and then you could still come back and look at whether it's appropriate to get the PPPL loan. But if you're disaster heavy, shall we say, employee light, you should be having that discussion with an appropriate. You need to take a look at it, but remember, you got to apply with the SBA for the disaster recovery, and you're going to apply through a bank and or lending partner such as ApplePie Capital for the SBA 7.
And I'll just add one last comment before we wrap, and that is the odds of your EIDL loan being looked at before your PPPL loan is funded are slim. So keep that in mind.
Excellent.
So, Paul, with that, why don't we wrap up? I would, we'll go around the horn. I'll just add one last comment, and that's around IFA. And if everybody would stay on the line just to hear the pitch, and that is IFA made a difference on this loan. You can see if you read the actual, with respect to this CARES Act, if you read the actual language, there's language in there about franchising. There's the whole bill, Ron, Tam, and others, and especially the IFA staff and the GR team, Robert Crusani, Matt Haller, Suzanne, and Michael Lehman, and others, worked diligently round the clock, 7 days a week to get this language for you. As Tam mentioned, we are already in discussions with Treasury about how can we expand upon this. So don't give up. If you are in a closed shop right now and you're a franchisee and you're struggling, we get it. We're here. We're trying to do our best we can for you. And don't give up. But you got to get this loan. You get liquidity. If the facts are when you get this loan 4 weeks from now and you're sitting there and you say, I'm not going to spend this because it's just not right, then you can give it back. But get the money and then figure out what the next step in your game plan is. Ron, I'll turn it to you and we'll let Tam finish.
Sure. I'm just going to echo what you said. Have choices. The only way you can have choices is to have cash in the bank. If you don't have cash in the bank, you don't have those choices. Go ahead, Tam.
I just want to thank IFA for letting us continue to put these webinars together. All of us are fielding a lot of questions individually. If there are resources that we didn't cover, questions that you might have, don't forget that we're going to post this on the IFA website. Check the schedule for more webinars moving forward. And remember that our franchise family is strong. If you need help outside of what we've talked about today, reach out. We've got all of the IFA structure available, the forums, the committees, that's what we're here for. And I'm just going to say what both of the guys have said as well. We're here, we're doing everything that we can, but get your stuff ready and let's go get this money that we need to keep going.
And stay healthy and be safe. And
Yeah.
Paul, back to you.
Thank you, everybody. And you know, this is a perfect example. You know, any trade association, but IFA in particular, is only as strong as its volunteer leaders. And right here today are 3 very strong volunteer leaders. We would not have gotten where we are without your help. And I can't thank you guys enough. And excellent. I mean, listen, like I said, I lost count of the questions. They were nonstop. And I was trying to answer some as they were coming in. But thank you all for attending today, guys. Thank you very, very much. This was the highest attended webinar that we've had to date. So on that note, again, IFA is standing strong with you. The franchise family is standing strong with you, and we will get through these challenging times together. Can't thank you all enough for your time, guys. Thank you. Take care, everybody. Enjoy.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Be well. Thank you. Stay safe.